I've got a little bit of a dirty secret to share. You know that old saying, sailors and schedules don't mix? Well, I'm here to tell you, probably most of us sail to a schedule of some sort. Hi, I'm Nico Waters, and welcome to the Boat Galley Podcast. Maybe it's myth busting, maybe it's not. But in any case, I'm giving you a couple of tips of how to make sailing to a schedule feel a little bit less crazy. Today's episode of the Boat Galley Podcast is sponsored by Teak Guard. Looking to refinish your boat's teak with a minimum of mess and fuss? Look no further. Teak Guard's non-toxic, water-based formulas for cleaning and finish will turn your teak from dingy to sparkling in no time. Use coupon code BG20 for 15% off of your order of $50 or more. Visit teakguard.com. Admire your teak with less maintenance. Cruisers and schedules don't mix. You've probably heard some version of this. And as I said in the intro, my feeling, and I know this is controversial, is that we are all on some kind of a schedule. It might be a tight schedule tied to a calendar. You need to be back for a flight for something. We needed to be back in the United States by June 1st of last year to make our daughter's graduation. That college graduation wasn't going to shift its time just for us. Sometimes that schedule is looser, like we need to be in a more protected anchorage because the weather is going to change and we need to be protected from a different direction. It might be, I want to get to Beaufort, North Carolina so that I'm ready to cross to the Caribbean at the best time to sail offshore as soon as my insurance allows me to. Whatever the schedule and whatever you're thinking of schedule is, I would argue that there's some kind of a schedule in everything that we do, even when cruising. And whether you agree with me or not, there are a couple of ways to make cruising to a schedule more pleasant. First of all is to leave yourself plenty of time. For me, this is particularly important when you're looking at a calendar, kind of a really tight deadline. You want to give yourself way more time than you could possibly imagine. It's far less stressful to be twiddling your thumbs at your destination than trying to make a destination work, even though the weather isn't great. And the second tip is to have backup bailout plans. This is a pretty good tip just for cruising in general, is to always have backup bailout plans. But if you're trying to get to some kind of a schedule, this is also important. We've lately been sailing to hard deadlines, ones that involve actual dates and calendars. Maybe our escape from the boatyard in November was one of the temperature looser kind of deadlines, because our version of a white Christmas definitely is sandy beaches and not snow. Thank you very much. But for B's graduation and for our more recent Christmas arrival of the kids to the boat, we spent quite a bit of time giving ourselves time to get to where we needed to be for those calendar deadlines. And in both cases, we spent quite a bit of time talking about the bailout plans. What were our backup plans if we couldn't get the boat where we wanted it to be, even though we had given ourselves lots and lots of time? Here's an example. B's graduation in early June of 2023 just, I hope you can see my air quotes, required that we get the boat from the Eastern Caribbean back to Pasadena, Maryland, where our car had been stashed with friends. Historically, May is a great time to be sailing from the Caribbean back to the States. The weather lies down, allows for fabulous sailing, should be absolutely no problem, easy peasy. Less than 2 weeks directly back from the Eastern Caribbean, no worries about beating into headwinds. So since it should have been about a 2-week trip, we decided we were going to allow just about 6 weeks to do that trip. Yeah, it didn't quite work out that way. We left the BVI on April 25th, and we didn't clear into Beaufort, North Carolina, and that's not Pasadena, Maryland, until May 14th. From there, it was another full week until we made it safely up the Chesapeake Bay to Pasadena, which is just south of Baltimore. If you're counting, that was just shy of 4 weeks to make that 2-week passage. Along the way, the fronts rolled off the United States East Coast every 2 to 3 days. We kept looking at the calendar, and we kept talking over our options. And what made us feel much better and not have to take terrible weather risks or push it, because as my friend Bean on Sailing Totem says, misery is optional, we realized that all we needed to do was to get to Florida. And from there, we could rent a car and drive up for graduation if we needed to. The most important part of the whole thing was getting to graduation. More recently, we needed to get to Marsh Harbor in the Abacos to greet our kids when they flew in for Christmas. And we had decided on this maybe reasonable, we thought it was reasonable goal even before we left the boatyard, which was kind of a tall order for a boat that hadn't really been cruised in well over a decade, and we knew we were going to take the intercoastal waterway going south. We figured, here was a backup plan, if worse came to worse, we'd just have the kids miss the connection from Miami, and we'd be in South Florida with them. We took a weather window from further north than we would have ideally to cross over to the Bahamas, because looking out further, it looked like we might not get another weather window. And that turned out to be a really great call, because we crossed over the beginning of December, and there was not another opportunity to cross the Gulf Stream until after Christmas. So in terms of getting to the Bahamas, we definitely won on the get there early front. But there was a little bit more of a complication, because we needed to get around a particular stretch of Atlantic Ocean, crossing 2 shallow cuts going around what's called Whale Key in the Abacos. Well, that same weather that made Gulf Stream crossings not easy, well, that was creating nasty conditions in those cuts. And even though we were just 10 miles away from Marsh Harbor, we weren't sure we were going to get the weather to get around that spot. So along comes bailout plan number 2, which, like the one that we had to get north for B's graduation, turned out to be unnecessary, but we had figured it out, which allowed us to, again, breathe more easily and not have to stress about grabbing a weather window that wasn't a weather window at all. That bailout plan was in the form of a ferry. The kids could, if needed, take a taxi to Treasure Key, and from there take a ferry to Green Turtle. No, not ideal. The taxi ride would be a lot more expensive. The ferry ride, an additional adventure, and reprovisioning in Green Turtle would be a little bit more limited than we would have had in Marsh Harbor. But again, the important part was getting together, getting the kids on the boat. And so maybe that's tip number 3 if you're sailing to a schedule, is figure out what the most important thing is. What's the critical piece? If you need to move for weather, is it critical that you get to the area where all your buddies are, or could you just go around the corner to another part of the key and nuzzle up to a nice beach even if there wasn't anybody else there? Understanding the most critical reason for sailing to a schedule and what you hopefully are going to accomplish, that might be tip number 3. As I record this, we're surrounded by unbelievable beauty in Pipe Creek, the Exumas. We're staring at yet another hard deadline. It's the middle of January. Julian graduates from college on April 23rd in Utah. We're either going to drive out there with our trusty van, or we're going to fly out. We haven't quite decided yet. We're tossing back and forth the idea possibly of getting back to the United States in time for the eclipse on April 8th. And yeah, the Bahamas is a whole lot closer than the Eastern Caribbean. And like we had earlier, there is always the Florida bailout plan. It's January 15th. Maybe we need to start back in 2 months. I guess we better get busy enjoying ourselves, because somebody sure better do it. And if we are sharing an anchorage together, I can't wait to get together to toast to our incredible good fortune, schedules or not, to being able to live this unbelievable lifestyle. Thank you so much for listening to the Boat Galley podcast. We love hearing from our listeners. We love it when you don't forget to subscribe in your favorite podcast app. Yes, you can listen to these on the website. Have you checked out the Boat Galley website? There's a whole lot of great stuff there about making boat life better. We also really love it when you share us with your friends. Have the most spectacular week.